wants to thank you first, but then he is going to introduce our speaker, and he is a brand new Rotarian.
Really good morning, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. One of the great things about being a part of Dublin City Schools is you get to work with extremely talented and very passionate educators. And a new person for Dublin Schools is our new Chief Academic Officer, Mrs. Kim Miller. And Kim certainly fits the mold of what I just said. Extremely passionate about public education, very, very dedicated to student learning and our children in this community. Kim is new to Dublin. She came from the Cincinnati area, where she has spent about the last 25 years of her career. Most recently, she was the assistant superintendent at Loveland Schools, but has worked in Forest Hills, Indian Hill, which is a highly affluent school system in Cincinnati, and also worked in Cincinnati Public. And so has an extreme background as far as working with children that come from a great variety of homes, which is something that is starting to become the case here in Dublin, as we have a large pocket of children, obviously, that come from very nice backgrounds, and a growing number of children that are coming from households of poverty. And so her background really fit hand in glove of what we're trying to accomplish here in Dublin Schools, and that is to make sure that public education works for every one of the 15,000 plus children that we're blessed to serve every day. Common Core is something that I don't know how much you know about that. Certainly from a political standpoint, that has a real loaded term, a connotation about that. And also, I'm sure you're aware, if you're reading the Dispatcher last month, all the hoopla and craziness over the new state-mandated tests that are required for accountability. So Kim is going to try her best in the short time that we have here today to kind of explain those concepts to you. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our Chief Academic Officer, the quarterback for the entire academic program in Dublin City Schools, Mrs. Kim Miller.
To be here. I did start out in Columbus. I went to Ohio State, so I'm an Ohio State grad, and then I headed down the road to Cincinnati. So I'm going to try to give you Common Core and state testing in 15 minutes, which is, not even barely enough time to scratch the surface. But hopefully it'll help you have a good understanding, or at least a general understanding, of what the two things are. And they are two separate entities, and I think it's important that we understand that. First, what are the Common Core standards? Basically, the Common Core standards are standards that define college and career readiness, and they are written in the areas of reading, language arts, and mathematics. Those are the only two content areas that Common Core refers to. Okay, and if you've heard, how many of you have heard the term college and career readiness? Okay, that's the new, not just politically but educationally. That it used to be 21st century skills, and now we're saying college and career readiness. Wanting to make sure that we're preparing our students for the next phase of their life. How were these standards created? Back in 2009, governors, educators, etc. came together really with the purpose of saying, we need some consistent standards across our states. Back in the day, you were born in a town, you were raised in a town, you stayed in the town, you died in the town, it was all the same. We are so transient in our work. Many of us, I don't think anyone said they went to Dublin Schools, so obviously all of us have been someplace else. And so we move. And so when students move, we would have vastly different standards from state to state. So this movement was really about consistency. Sometimes in the media, you'll hear common referred like as if the standards are very basic and low level. Common does not mean basic in this sense. Common means consistent across states. The standards are based on existing state standards. In Ohio, we have had standards since 2001. Experienced teachers and content leaders, experts from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, the National English Teachers Associations. Those groups were part of developing the standards, so these were not politically developed. Educators were a part of them. And then also the public. Over 10,000 comments were solicited from the public in developing these standards. I'm trying to go really fast. How are they different? In English language arts, in both cases, math and English language arts, there are shifts in the standards. So what are the shifts? In English language arts, it's a focus on vocabulary and reading and writing with increasing complexity. One of the things that was found as we looked at what we were doing in schools is sometimes our complexity was not increasing, especially in reading language arts. You may be talking about author's purpose, main idea, from first grade through high school, but the text complexity should be increasing as you go. And so there's really a focus on making sure we're increasing the text complexity for students. There is an emphasis on making sure that students have textual evidence to support their thinking. You know, it's not okay to say, well, it's my interpretation, so whatever I say is fine. No, there must be textual evidence to support a student's thinking and their writing. And there's also an emphasis on nonfiction text, not just fiction text. So that's something that was a big shift as well. And then also we're building content knowledge through content. If you are a teacher of science, any science, or social studies, and even mathematics, they have literacy standards across all content areas. If you are in a chemistry class, you have to be able to read and comprehend chemistry text. And so teachers of sciences have to also teach the literacy of their content area. And that didn't exist before. In math, greater focus on fewer topics. The United States has often been characterized as having a curriculum that is a mile wide and an inch deep. And so we never would go into great depth. Now it's fewer topics in greater depth, and we're not repeating over and over and over again. We really want students to learn and develop conceptual knowledge. In math, also coherence, linking topics and thinking across grade levels. I talked about language arts and repeating some things as you go through. Language arts has always been what we would call a spiral subject where you come back around to different things. Math is doing that more and more too. So you don't just learn something once. Now, it's not so much the repetition that we used to do, but coming back to a concept and applying it in a new way. So there's more of a spiraling. And then also increasing the rigor. Conceptual understanding. We don't want students just to be able to quickly solve a problem, an algorithm. We want them to have conceptual understanding. What does multiplication actually mean? Don't just memorize that 3 times 3 is 9. Understand it is repeated 3s. Okay, so we want that conceptual understanding. Fluency. Now we want them to know those math facts like this because it helps them to focus more on the concepts, but we want that conceptual understanding behind it. And then also an application in real world settings. Gone are the days of do 25 or 50 problems for homework. How many of you remember as a student saying, oh, I hate the word problems? Remember that? Don't assign word problems. They're all word problems now. It's all application in the real world. It's not so much, here's a problem, figure it out. It's here's a scenario. What are the mathematical concepts you have to apply in order to solve that situation? So that's much more rigorous. Let me give you some examples. These are actual standards from the Common Core standards. English Language Arts in kindergarten with prompting, ask and answer questions about key details in text. Kindergartner may not be reading the text him or herself yet, but they should be able to answer questions about key details in text. In grade 5, it's quote accurately from text when explaining what the text says explicitly and when drawing inferences. I used to teach 8th grade when we were doing proficiency tests. Inferences were something that we were working on with 8th graders. That's in 5th grade. We want them to also be able to get beyond what the text says explicitly. And then in grade 11, cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support analysis of text. So again, not just recall, we want analysis of text. And it talks about where the text leaves matters uncertain. We all experience that in our work. Everything is not always certain. And so we want students grappling with those types of ideas. In math, in grade 1, students will be solving real-world numbers that call for addition of 3 whole numbers whose sum is less than or equal to 20 using object drawings, equations, with a symbol for the unknown number to represent a problem. Does that sound like algebra to anyone? Unknown numbers and symbols? That's algebra, 1st grade. In grade 6, we're solving real-world and mathematical problems by writing and solving equations in the form x plus p equals q, etc. and we're solving for non-negative and rational numbers. Again, algebraic thinking, and it's not just solving, they're writing equations, deciding what the equation should be. High school algebra, we're distinguishing between situations that can be modeled with linear functions and with exponential functions, and we're looking at modeling across all the content areas. Key difference, when most of us were in school, we might have been given an algorithm, and asked to solve it. Today we're giving students situations and saying, what algorithm should you use? When do you apply? I was saying to somebody recently, we're not so much teaching math as we're teaching problem solving and reasoning with mathematical concepts. That's different, okay, different than what we had. There's a lot of misunderstandings about what the standards do and don't do. They don't dictate our curriculum. In Dublin City Schools, we still decide our curriculum, what we will actually teach each day. That's up to us. These are just, you saw from those examples, they're big concepts that we're teaching, but the details of what we're going to teach still lies with us. It doesn't ask us to use specific texts or programs. We choose our resources. We recently adopted digits for our middle school math. That's up to us. That's not dictated by any standards. Oops. And it doesn't determine our course offerings. What we offer in Dublin City Schools is, again, up to us and our community. So when we decide to, if we decide to bring on a new course, we look at the standards and we want to base it in the standards, but we determine, again, the courses that we are going to offer. What do our teachers say about the standards? They really like these standards. This is actually, the first is from our high school math lead teacher, and she says, my students are working harder and applying concepts more than in the past. Students are learning conceptually, which leads to the transfer of information. We all know if you don't understand something conceptually, you can't transfer it to a new situation. And students are just learning more, and the standards are good. They're good for our students, and they're good for our future. Okay, those are the standards, and as educators, we like the standards. They're rigorous, they're challenging. When I shared this with some of our seniors in our community, one of the people in the audience said, why is anyone upset about that? When I showed those standards. They're good. Very, very good standards. We're very happy with them. State testing is a different animal altogether. So just to give you a flavor of what's going on in the schools, let me put this all up here. From February through May, we are giving the Ohio Achievement Assessment to third graders for reading. We are giving the Ohio graduation test to all sophomores and any 11th and 12th graders who still have sections to pass. We are giving new Ohio Department of Education tests in 5th and 8th grade in science, and in 4th and 6th grade in high school social studies. I'm sorry, I left out high school science. We also had to do physical science this year. And then we're giving 4th and 6th grade social studies as well as U.S. government and U.S. history. We're also giving the new PARC assessment in reading and math through 4th and 8th grade in reading, 3rd through 8th grade in math. The OTELA is the Ohio Test of English Language Acquisition, so our English language learners have to also take that, and students with more significant disabilities are participating in alternate assessment. So, that's a lot of testing that's going on, and many of our students are taking multiples of those. And these are over multiple days that they're taking these tests. You may have heard of opting out, people talking about not letting their children test. We had about 100 students who opted out of testing, or their parents opted them out. In the past, we typically would have around 10. For 15,000 plus students, that's a very low number. There are districts around the state. I think that Dr. Hoadley has a colleague, almost 25% of the students, or 25% of the district did not take testing. My former district, Southwest Ohio, is pretty conservative, and and that's not a bad thing, but a lot higher number of opt-outs in the Cincinnati area. My former district, I think they ended up with 300 opt-outs in a much smaller district. So we really didn't have much. I really attribute that to our principals, our teachers, communicating very clearly. Doug Baker, our public information officer, lots of strong communication so that our parents really understood what these tests were. And ultimately, we take good care of kids in school. We don't make this a negative experience for students. As adults, as educators, we're not really happy about the amount of testing, but we don't portray that to our students. We make it a very positive experience for our kids. And so our parents, I think, trust us. And again, teachers and principals, they are the key to that. Changing laws regarding testing. In December, the law around high school testing changed. We were told that students would take physical science as a graduation requirement. In December, it was changed that they didn't have to take physical science. The law says they would take physical science or biology, but then ODE said, but you have to make them take physical science. But we said, but it's not required, but you have to do it. So we've got some changing laws here that make this a little difficult. Conflicting guidelines is a challenge. We were told this is related to U.S. government and U.S. history, one set of rules. When the test booklets came with the test, the rules were different. So that's a challenge. We had 16 days of interrupted instruction. In order to get all of these tests in, we've had to adjust our schedules on 16 different days. That means shortened class periods, in some cases canceled classes, in order to accommodate the testing requirements. Dr. Hoadley mentioned, we have a large number of students who are English language learners. We think that's a great part of our school district, but we have to find translators for those. We have over 60 languages being spoken in our schools, and so to find translators for that many students is a challenge. And so that's a cost to school districts. And then the rules for park testing on accommodations, things that you're allowed to adjust for students who have disabilities, is different than under our old testing. So under just OGT or the OAAs that we used to take in the past, the rules of the accommodations you're allowed to give are different. Over 1,000 IEPs had to be changed. That means 1,000 phone calls or meetings to parents and trying to explain to parents why their children can't have the accommodations that they've always had and use on a daily basis, but now they can't have them for these tests. That's a challenge to explain that. But those are the rules that we have to follow. There's a cost. There's a huge financial cost. I'm trying to remember the number. I figured this up just recently. We've spent about $200,000 just to implement tests. So in paying translators, paying substitute teachers to cover classes while teachers are continuing to test students who need extended time, additional calculators, etc. So there's definitely a financial cost to the district. There's a cost in terms of personnel. For students who get extended time, those teachers have to stay with their students. So while all the other students are back in class, they don't get their regular teacher to teach because the teacher has to stay and continue testing. And so there's a cost from personnel. I've already mentioned instructional time. Some of our concerns around testing, it's time consuming, it's costly, it interrupts instruction for kids. This testing is also summative, meaning it comes at the end, and we can't use it to help students. The purpose of assessment is to get information in order to make adjustments in instruction. It's much like if you're not feeling well, you go to the doctor. You want to get information so that you can do something to feel better. Testing should help us to help kids. The results of these tests that we're taking now will not be back until probably next December. So state report cards won't come out until January or February of next year. So let me put this in perspective. If you're a 9th grader taking the end of course exams this year, you will get your results in time to schedule your junior year classes. So that's when we'll get the results. We understand in the testing world it takes time. Our concern is students and districts are held accountable for these tests in this very first implementation. Typically it's almost piloting and then you set your cut scores and your passing rates, etc. But there's no sort of year of implementation. It all counts. We use what are called formative assessments, checks along the way during instruction to inform instruction. And we actually as a district have cut down on some of our formative assessments, which we use right away because of the time for the summative assessments. And the results are used to rank districts, but the numbers are going to be misleading. So those 100 students who didn't take the test will factor into our scores as if they failed the test. So it won't just be reported as 100 non-participation. They'll count as failing grades for the district. So when you see our scores and our grades, and for some schools, we have some schools with higher numbers of students who opted out. That can make a difference between an A and a B or a B and a C on the report card. So it will impact that. We believe assessment's a valuable tool. We're concerned about state testing taking away meaningful time. We're not opposed to state testing. We're not opposed to accountability. We're just concerned about the amount of it at this point. And I already said, a positive impact on students is really the only reason to do an assessment. And so we're concerned about that. Questions?